The scream tore through the winter silence like a knife through silk, and Garrett Lawrence reined his horse so hard the gelding nearly sat back on its haunches. He twisted in the saddle, scanning the white landscape of northern New Mexico territory, squinting against the late afternoon glare off the snow. For a moment he heard nothing but the wind whistling through the bare aspens, and he wondered if exhaustion was playing tricks on his mind. Then it came again, a woman's cry, raw and desperate, carried on the bitter December air of 1884. Garrett kicked his horse forward, following the sound across the frozen meadow toward a stand of ponderosa pines. His breath plumed in the cold as he urged the animal faster, snow spraying up from the hooves. He had been riding for 3 days straight, returning to Pinon with a string of horses he had purchased in Colorado, and every bone in his body ached for a warm fire and hot food. But that sound, that terrible sound of someone in distress, drove all thoughts of comfort from his mind. He found her collapsed against a fallen log, half buried in the snow that had begun falling again in thick, wet flakes. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins and spread across the white ground like spilled ink. She wore a heavy wool coat that had seen better days, and beneath it her body was clearly, unmistakably swollen with child. Her face was pale as death except for 2 spots of fevered color high on her cheekbones. "Madam!" Garrett leaped from his horse and dropped to his knees beside her. "Madam, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, and he saw they were the color of strong coffee. Fear and pain warred in those depths. "Please," she gasped, and her hand shot out to grip his arm with surprising strength. "Please, the babies. It's too soon. They're coming, and I cannot stop it." Babies. Plural. Garrett felt his stomach drop. He was a cowboy, a horsebreaker, not a doctor or a midwife. He knew how to deliver foals and calves, but human infants? And twins at that? "Where were you headed, moi?" he asked, fighting to keep his voice steady. "How far from help?" "I was trying to reach Pinon," she said through gritted teeth. Another contraction seized her, and she cried out, curling into herself. "My wagon! The wheel broke, miles back. I tried to walk, but the snow, and then the pain started coming faster, and I could not go on." Garrett looked around desperately. The light was already fading, the short winter day dying fast. Even if he could get her on his horse, Pinon was still a good 8 miles away over rough terrain, and night was coming on hard with more snow in those heavy clouds. She would never survive the ride, and those babies would not wait. He could see it in the way her whole body tensed, in the frequency of her cries. "All right," he said, making the decision in an instant. "All right, we're not going anywhere. I'm going to take care of you right here. What's your name?" "Delilah," she managed. "Delilah Parker." "I'm Garrett Lawrence. I've helped birth more animals than I can count, Miss Parker, and I'm going to help you now. But I need to get us some shelter and a fire going first. Can you hold on for just a few minutes?" She nodded, teeth chattering, and he saw she was shaking violently. How long had she been out here in the cold? An hour? More? He shrugged out of his heavy sheepskin coat and wrapped it around her, then moved with the speed and efficiency of a man who had lived rough for most of his 30 years. There was an overhang in the rocks about 20 yards away, not quite a cave, but deep enough to provide some shelter from the wind and snow. He scooped Delilah up in his arms, surprised at how light she was despite her condition, and carried her there, settling her as gently as he could on the driest patch of ground. Then he worked like a man possessed. He gathered deadfall wood that was dry enough beneath the snow, his hands moving with practiced speed. He had flint and steel in his saddlebags, and within minutes he had a small fire crackling to life. The smoke curled up and out through a natural chimney in the rocks above. He brought his bedroll and spread it beneath Delilah, then added hers that he found still strapped to her back, giving her some padding from the cold ground. He unsaddled his horse and used the saddle blankets for additional warmth, then hobbled the animal where it could shelter from the wind. "Water," Delilah whispered. "Please." He had a canteen, and he held it to her lips while she drank. In the firelight, he could see her more clearly now. She was beautiful in a quiet, delicate way, with fine features and skin like porcelain. She could not be more than 22 or 23 at most. There was no ring on her finger, and he wondered at her story, but now was not the time for questions. Another contraction hit her, and she grabbed his hand, squeezing until he thought his bones might crack. "They're coming," she gasped. "Oh, God, they're coming now." Garrett had never been so frightened in his life, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Then let's bring them into the world," he said. "I'm going to need you to trust me, Delilah. Can you do that?" She looked at him with those dark eyes, and something passed between them in that moment, some wordless understanding born of desperate circumstance. "I trust you," she said. He washed his hands in the snow until they were raw and numb, then heated them by the fire. He had delivered foals in storms, calves in the middle of the night in wild country. This was different. This was a human life, 2 human lives, but the principles were the same. He talked to her in a low, steady voice, the same voice he used with spooked horses, telling her she was strong, she was brave, she could do this. He built up the fire until the heat reflected off the rock walls and created a pocket of warmth in the freezing wilderness. The first baby came as full darkness fell, and the snow swirled thick outside their shelter. Delilah screamed once, a sound that echoed off the rocks, and then Garrett was holding a tiny, slippery infant in his hands. It was so small, impossibly small, and for one terrible moment it did not move or make a sound. Then he rubbed its back firmly with a clean cloth from his pack, and the baby let out a thin, wavering cry that wasn't the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. "A boy," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "You have a son." He wrapped the infant in his own spare shirt, the cleanest thing he had, and placed him in Delilah's arms. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at the tiny creature, but there was no time to rest. The second baby was coming, and coming fast. This birth was harder. The baby was turned wrong, and Garrett had to reach in and gently, carefully, guide the infant into position while Delilah sobbed with pain and exhaustion. His heart hammered against his ribs and sweat poured down his face despite the cold. He prayed to a God he was not sure he believed in anymore, prayed like he never had before, and then suddenly the baby slipped free into his waiting hands. Another boy, smaller than the first, and this one did not cry right away. Garrett's blood turned to ice. He cleaned the infant's nose and mouth, rubbed the tiny chest, and when that did not work, he blew gently into the baby's face. "Come on," he whispered fiercely. "Come on, little one, fight, fight for your mama." And then, like a miracle, the baby gasped and began to wail, a thin sound but strong enough. Relief flooded through Garrett so intensely he felt dizzy. He wrapped this one in his spare bandana and another clean cloth, then placed him beside his brother in Delilah's arms. She was crying harder now, looking at her 2 sons, these impossibly tiny creatures who had been born in the worst possible circumstances, but who were alive, who were breathing and moving their little fists. "They're beautiful," she whispered. "They're perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Garrett." But the night was far from over. Garrett knew the dangers that followed birth, knew about bleeding and fever and all the things that could still go wrong. He had to deliver the afterbirth and make sure Delilah did not hemorrhage. He had to keep all 3 of them warm through the bitter night. He fed the fire constantly, never letting it die down, using all the wood he had gathered and then going out into the storm to find more. He melted snow for water and made Delilah drink as much as she could. He checked on her constantly, watching for signs of fever or excessive bleeding, relieved when she seemed to be recovering as well as could be expected. The babies, though, they were so small. Too small. They had come at least a month early, maybe more, and he did not know if they would survive the night. He kept them tucked against Delilah's skin for warmth. wrapped in every piece of fabric he could spare, but they were so fragile, so vulnerable. He sat by the fire, watching over them all, his rifle across his knees in case wolves or mountain lions came sniffing around, drawn by the smell of blood. Somewhere in the deepest part of the night, when the wind howled like something alive and the fire cast dancing shadows on the rock walls, Delilah spoke. "I should tell you," she said quietly, "in case I don't make it through, in case something happens to me." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Garrett said firmly. "You're strong. You're going to be fine." "But if something does," her voice was insistent. "Their father is dead. He was my husband. We were married. It was proper and right, no matter what people might think seeing me alone like this. Thomas Parker. He was a good man. He worked as a clerk in Santa Fe, and we were happy. But then the fever came through last summer, and he died. And his family never approved of me. They said I trapped him into marriage, that I was beneath him. When they found out I was carrying twins, they said terrible things. They said they would take my babies from me, raise them properly, and I would never see them again." "So you ran," Garrett said. "I ran. I had a little money saved, and I bought a wagon and supplies. I was trying to reach California, start fresh where no one knew me. But the wagon broke down, and then the snow came early, and I have made such a mess of everything." Her voice broke. "My poor babies, born in the wilderness like this." "Your babies are alive," Garrett said, moving closer to look at the twins sleeping against her. In the firelight, their faces were peaceful, serene. "You kept them alive by being strong and smart and brave. You did not give up. That makes you a hell of a good mother, Delilah Parker." She looked at him, really looked at him, and he felt something shift in his chest. There was something about her, this woman who had endured so much, who had fought so hard for her children. Her courage humbled him. And there was something more, too, something in the way she looked at him with such gratitude and trust, as if he were some kind of hero instead of just a cowboy who had happened along at the right moment. The night stretched on, endless and cold. Garrett dozed, sitting up, jerking awake every few minutes to check the fire and make sure everyone was still breathing. Delilah slept in fits and starts, exhausted beyond measure but unable to rest fully with 2 newborns depending on her. The babies nursed weakly, and she worried they were not getting enough, but Garrett assured her they were doing well, better than he had dared to hope. Dawn came slowly, the darkness fading to gray, and then to the pale light of a winter morning. The snow had stopped sometime in the night, and when Garrett looked out from their shelter, he saw a world transformed, everything covered in white, beautiful and deadly. The cold was bone deep, the kind that could kill in hours if you were not prepared. "We need to get to town," he said. "You need a real doctor, and those babies need warmth and proper care. Do you think you can ride if I hold you?" Delilah was pale and weak, but she nodded. "I can do whatever I must for my sons." Garrett fashioned a sling from his coat, creating a pouch against Delilah's chest where both babies could nestle, warm and protected. Then he broke camp with the efficiency of long practice, scattering the fire and packing up his gear. He lifted Delilah onto his horse, then mounted behind her, one arm wrapped firmly around her waist to keep her steady. The babies were a warm bundle between them, silent now, sleeping the deep sleep of newborns. The ride to Piñon took over 3 hours, slow and careful over the snow-covered ground. Garrett stopped twice to let Delilah rest and check on the babies. His arms ached from holding her upright, and his horse labored under the double load, but he kept them moving, knowing that every minute in the cold was dangerous. When they finally rode into Piñon just after noon, people stopped and stared. Garrett did not care. He rode straight to Dr. Morrison's house and hammered on the door until the elderly physician answered, taking in the scene with quick, sharp eyes. "Twins," Garrett said shortly, "born last night in the wilderness. They came early. The mother needs care." Dr. Morrison did not waste time with questions. He helped Delilah down and into his house, calling for his wife to prepare the spare bedroom and heat water. Garrett followed, unwilling to leave until he knew they would be all right. He stood in the hallway while the doctor examined Delilah and the babies, his hat in his hands, feeling strangely hollow now that the crisis had passed. Mrs. Morrison brought him coffee and food, which he accepted gratefully. "You did a remarkable thing," she said kindly, "bringing that poor girl and her babies through the night in this weather. The Lord was watching over you all." Garrett did not know about that, but he nodded his thanks. He waited, and finally Dr. Morrison emerged, wiping his hands on a clean towel. "She'll recover," the doctor said, "and she's exhausted and she'll need rest and good food, but she's young and strong. The babies, though," he shook his head. "They're very small, Mr. Lawrence, too small. The next few days will tell if they have the strength to survive. But you did everything right. If you had tried to ride through last night in the storm, all three of them would be dead. You saved their lives." Relief and worry warred in Garrett's chest. "Can I see her?" The doctor studied him for a moment, then nodded. "For a few minutes. She's been asking for you." Garrett entered the room quietly. Delilah lay in a proper bed now, clean and warm, her dark hair spread across the white pillow. The babies were wrapped in soft blankets, one on each side of her. She looked impossibly young and vulnerable, and when she saw Garrett, her face lit up with a smile that made his heart skip. "They say you saved us," she said softly. "You saved yourself," Garrett replied, moving to stand beside the bed. "I just helped a little." More than a little. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers small and cold in his. "I don't know how to thank you. You're a stranger, and you risked your life for us. You delivered my babies in a snowstorm. You are the bravest, kindest man I have ever met." Garrett felt his face heat. He was not used to such praise, had never thought of himself as particularly brave or kind. He was just a man who did what needed doing. "What will you do now?" he asked. "Where will you go?" The light faded from her eyes. "I don't know. I have a little money left, enough for a few days of room and board perhaps. Then I suppose I will have to figure something out. Find work somehow, though who would hire a woman with newborn twins?" She looked down at her sons, and he saw the fear in her face, the uncertainty. "You could stay in Pignon," Garrett heard himself say. "It's a good town, friendly people. I have a ranch a few miles outside of town, not much, just a small spread with some horses and cattle. But the house is sound and there's plenty of room. You and the babies could stay there while you recover and figure out what comes next. No strings attached. Just a place to rest and heal." Delilah stared at him. "Why would you do that?" "You don't know me. I could be anyone." "You're a mother trying to protect her children," Garrett said simply. "That's all I need to know. And besides," he added with a small smile, "I helped bring those boys into the world. I feel kind of responsible for them now." Tears welled in her eyes and spilled over. "I cannot impose on you like that." "It's not an imposition if I'm offering." Garrett squeezed her hand gently. "Think about it. Rest now. We can talk more when you're stronger." But even as he left the doctor's house and went to tend to his horse and find a room at the boarding house, Garrett knew she would accept. He had seen it in her eyes, the desperate hope, the relief at finding an unexpected lifeline. And he knew with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified him that his life had just changed in ways he could not yet fully understand. Over the next 3 days, while Delilah recovered at Dr. Morrison's house, Garrett found himself inventing reasons to visit. He brought fresh milk from a neighbor's cow, knowing it would help Delilah regain her strength. He brought soft flannel that Mrs. Morrison could use to make proper clothes for the babies. He brought flowers, hothouse roses that cost more than he wanted to admit because Delilah's room seemed too stark, and he wanted to see her smile. Each visit lasted longer than the last. They talked, really talked, in a way Garrett had never talked to anyone before. Delilah told him about her life in Santa Fe, about her husband who had been kind but weak, unable to stand up to his family's cruelty. She told him about her dreams of California, of starting a shop, or maybe teaching school. She told him about her fears for her sons who remained worryingly small and quiet. nursing poorly despite her best efforts. Garrett told her about his own life, about growing up on a hard-scrabble ranch in Texas, learning to ride before he could walk, about losing his parents to Comanche raiders when he was 16 and heading west alone, working as a cowhand and bronc buster, saving every penny until he could buy his own piece of land 3 years ago, about the loneliness of the bachelor life, the long evenings with no one to talk to but his horse and the stars. On the fourth day, Dr. Morrison declared Delilah well enough to leave his care if she had somewhere comfortable to go. Garrett arrived with a wagon borrowed from the livery, padded with straw and blankets to cushion the ride. He drove slowly and carefully, mindful of every bump and rut in the frozen road. Delilah sat beside him, wrapped in a quilt, with the baby secured in a basket at her feet. His ranch house was small but solid, built of adobe with a tin roof that did not leak. There was one main room with a fireplace, a separate bedroom, and a lean-to kitchen. It was clean and neat, though sparely furnished in the way of a man living alone. Garrett had spent the previous evening scrubbing everything and building up a good supply of firewood. He had borrowed a cradle from the pastor's wife and set it near the fireplace where it would be warm. "It's not much," he said as he helped Delilah down from the wagon, suddenly seeing the place through her eyes and finding it wanting. "It's wonderful," she said, and she meant it. "It's warm and safe and more than I dared to hope for. Thank you, Garrett. Thank you for everything." He carried the babies inside one at a time, marveling at how light they were, how their tiny hands would curl around his finger when he touched their palms. He had named them in his head, though he had not told Delilah yet. Thomas for their father, and William, because it was a strong name and they would need strength to survive. But that was her choice to make, not his. That first night at the ranch, Garrett slept in the barn with the horses, giving Delilah privacy and proper rest. But he was up before dawn, as always, and when he came inside to start the fire and make coffee, he found her awake and nursing one of the twins. The scene stopped him in his tracks. The early light coming through the window touched her hair with gold, and there was something so peaceful, so right about her presence in his home that it made his chest ache. "Which one is that?" he asked softly, not wanting to disturb the moment. "I think it's the one who was born first," she said. "I've been trying to tell them apart. This one has a tiny birthmark on his left shoulder, the other doesn't. I thought perhaps I might call them Thomas, after their father and William. What do you think?" Garrett felt absurdly pleased that she had chosen the same names he had thought of. "I think those are fine names, strong names." "Will you be their godfather?" Delilah asked suddenly. "It's probably presumptuous of me to ask, but you delivered them, you saved them, and I want them to know as they grow up that there was a man who cared about them even before they drew their first breath." "I would be honored," Garrett said, and meant it with his whole heart. The days fell into a rhythm. Garrett rose early to tend the animals and do the endless work of a ranch, but he came inside frequently to check on Delilah and the twins, to bring her food and water, to hold a baby while she rested. She grew stronger quickly, her color returning, her movements less fragile. The babies remained small, but they were nursing better now, gaining weight slowly, their thin cries growing stronger. In the evenings, after the chores were done, Garrett would sit by the fire and they would talk. Sometimes Delilah would sew, making clothes for the babies from fabric he brought from town. Sometimes she would cook, simple meals that nonetheless tasted like heaven to a man used to his own rough bachelor fare. Sometimes they would just sit in comfortable silence, watching the flames dance, the babies sleeping peacefully in their cradle. Garrett found himself falling in love, though he tried to fight it. She was a widow, still grieving her husband with 2 infants to care for. She had made it clear she was only staying until she recovered enough to move on to California. He had no right to complicate her life with his feelings, but every day it became harder to imagine the house without her, harder to picture going back to the lonely existence he had known before. 2 weeks after Delilah had come to his ranch, a blizzard struck, worse than the one that had nearly killed her. The wind howled like demons and snow piled up against the house in drifts higher than a man's head. They were trapped inside together, the world reduced to the walls of the small house and the circle of firelight. Garrett strung a rope from the house to the barn so he could tend the animals without getting lost in the whiteout. On the third day of the storm, when the walls seemed to press in and cabin fever made them both restless, they argued for the first time. It started over something small, Garrett tracking snow across the clean floor, but it escalated quickly. "You treat me like I'm made of glass," Delilah snapped, her eyes flashing. "I'm not helpless, Garrett. I can do more than sit around and nurse babies all day. I can help with chores, with cooking, with anything you need." "You just had twins in the wilderness 3 weeks ago," Garrett shot back. "You need to rest and recover, not work yourself into exhaustion. You don't get to tell me what I need. You're not my husband. You're not my family. You're just a man who happened to find me in the snow. I'm grateful. More grateful than I can say, but I won't be treated like a helpless child in need of constant supervision." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and hurtful. Garrett felt something crack inside him. "You're right," he said quietly. "I'm not your husband. I'm not your family. I'm just a fool who thought maybe you might want to stay, but I can see that was stupid of me. California's waiting after all, your big plans and your better life." He grabbed his coat and hat and went out into the storm, not caring that it was dangerous, needing to put space between them before he said something he would really regret. He made his way to the barn and sat in the hay, shaking with cold and anger and hurt. He had been an idiot to think this could be anything more than temporary, to let himself hope. He did not know how long he sat there before he heard the barn door open. Delilah stood silhouetted against the white fury of the storm, wrapped in his spare coat, no shawl or bonnet, snow already covering her hair. "Are you insane?" Garrett leaped up and pulled her inside, slamming the door against the wind. "You could have died out there. The babies need you. You cannot take risks like that." "I needed to find you," she said, and she was crying, tears streaming down her face. "I needed to tell you that I'm sorry, that I did not mean any of it. You have been nothing but kind and good and generous, and I repaid you with cruelty. I'm frightened, Garrett. I'm so frightened all the time. Frightened that the babies will die, that I'm not strong enough to raise them alone, that I'm a burden on you, that you'll regret taking us in. And I lash out when I'm scared. I always have, and I'm sorry." Garrett cupped her face in his hands, brushing the tears away with his thumbs. "You could never be a burden," he said fiercely. "Never. Having you here, having the boys here, it's been the best 3 weeks of my life. This house was just a building before you came. Now it's a home. You made it a home. And I know you're planning to leave. I know you want California, but God help me, Delilah. I don't want you to go. I want you to stay. I want to help you raise those boys. I want to wake up every morning and see you in my kitchen. I want to grow old with you. I'm in love with you. I think I've been in love with you since I found you in the snow, and you looked at me with those brave, beautiful eyes." She stared at him, her lips parted in shock. "You love me?" "I love you. I know it's too soon. I know I have no right, but it's the truth, and I cannot keep it to myself anymore." "Oh, Garrett," she laughed, a shaky, joyful sound. "You absolute fool. I have been falling in love with you since you delivered my babies by firelight and looked at them like they were precious miracles instead of squalling inconveniences. I have been falling in love with you every day, watching you work so hard, seeing how gentle you are with Thomas and William, listening to you talk about your dreams and your life. I never wanted to go to California. I only wanted to run away from pain and find someplace safe, and I found it here with you. I found home." He kissed her then, in the hay-scented warmth of the barn with the storm raging outside, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. She kissed him back with a desperation that matched his own, her hands fisting in his shirt, and when they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "Marry me," Garrett said. I know it's fast. I know people will talk, but I don't care. Marry me and let me be a father to your sons. Let me love you the way you deserve to be loved. Please, Delilah." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." They married 2 weeks later in the small church in Pignon, with Dr. Morrison and his wife as witnesses and half the town in attendance. Delilah wore a simple dress of blue wool that one of the neighbor women had helped her make, and she carried wildflowers that Garrett had somehow found even in the dead of winter, hothouse blooms from Santa Fe that cost a small fortune. Thomas and William, now 6 weeks old, and finally starting to gain weight properly, slept through the ceremony in the arms of various doting townswomen. Garrett had never been so happy. He slipped the ring on Delilah's finger, a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother, and when the pastor pronounced them man and wife, he kissed her with all the love in his heart. The congregation cheered, and someone started playing a fiddle, and there was dancing right there in the church. That night, in the privacy of their bedroom, they came together as husband and wife with a tenderness that brought tears to Delilah's eyes. Garrett was gentle and patient, mindful that her body was still recovering, and he made sure her pleasure came before his own. Afterward, she lay in his arms, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I never thought I could be this happy again," she murmured. "After Thomas died, after everything his family put me through, I thought I was done with love, done with trusting anyone. But you changed everything." "You changed everything for me too," Garrett said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "I was just existing before you came into my life. Now I'm actually living." The twins began to fuss in their cradle, and Delilah sighed and started to rise, but Garrett stopped her. "Let me," he said. He got up and went to the babies, changing them with the practiced efficiency he had developed over the past weeks, then bringing them to Delilah to nurse. He watched his wife feed his sons, because that's what they were now, his sons in every way that mattered, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost frightening. The winter passed slowly but not unpleasantly. They were snowed in more often than not, but Garrett did not mind. His world had narrowed to the walls of the ranch house and the 4 people inside it, and that world was enough. He taught Delilah to play chess with a set his father had carved from wood, and she beat him more often than not, crowing with delight at each victory. They read aloud to each other in the evenings, books borrowed from the pastor's surprisingly extensive library. They made plans for the ranch, for expanding the herd come spring, for building on an extra room when the twins got bigger. Thomas and William grew steadily stronger. By 3 months, they were fat and healthy, their thin cries replaced by lusty bellows that could wake the dead. They looked like their mother, with dark hair and dark eyes, but Garrett thought he could see something of himself in them too, in the stubborn set of their jaws and the way they gripped his fingers with surprising strength. Spring came in a rush of melting snow and greening grass. Garrett worked from dawn to dusk, repairing fences and breaking horses, building up his herd. Delilah planted a garden and hung laundry on the line and turned the ranch house into a real home, with curtains on the windows and flowers on the table and the sound of babies laughing. One evening in late April, with the sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Garrett came in from the fields to find Delilah standing in the doorway with a strange expression on her face. The twins were asleep in their cradle, and she had one hand pressed to her stomach. "What's wrong?" he asked, immediately concerned. "Are you sick?" "Not sick," she said slowly. "At least not the way you mean. Garrett, I think I'm pregnant again." He stared at her, processing the words. "Already? But the twins are only 6 months old." I know it's too soon. We should have been more careful, but these things happen, and I'm almost certain that I'm expecting again." She looked at him anxiously. "Are you angry?" "Angry!" Garrett felt a laugh bubble up in his chest, pure and joyful. He swept her into his arms and spun her around, making her squeal. "Angry? I'm thrilled. Another baby, Delilah. Our baby, made from love this time. Not just duty. When will it come?" "December, I think. Around Christmas, if my calculations are right." Garrett set her down carefully, as if she might break, and placed his hand over hers on her still flat stomach. A Christmas baby. That seems fitting somehow. The pregnancy was harder than Delilah's first. She was sick for months, unable to keep down more than broth and dry bread. The twins were in that difficult stage where they were mobile but had no sense of danger, crawling everywhere and getting into everything. Garrett hired a girl from town to help, the daughter of a neighbor who needed the money, and she came 3 days a week to assist with the housework and watch the twins while Delilah rested. Summer came hot and dry, and Garrett worried constantly about drought and fire, but the rains came in August, and by September the grass was lush and green, the cattle fat and healthy. He sold a dozen horses at a good price and used the money to buy a new iron stove for Delilah and a proper cradle for the coming baby, and a few head of breeding stock to expand the herd. The twins had their first birthday in a snowstorm, just like they had been born in a snowstorm. Delilah made a cake with precious sugar and butter, and Thomas and William made an enormous mess with it, smearing frosting in their hair and laughing with delight. Garrett watched them with a heart so full he thought it might burst. These boys, who he had delivered by firelight in the wilderness, who he had feared would not survive their first night, were now healthy, happy toddlers who called him Papa and clung to his legs when he came in from work. In early December, with Christmas approaching and Delilah's belly enormous, Garrett drove to Santa Fe to purchase gifts and supplies. He had been planning this trip for weeks, had saved money specifically for it. He bought Delilah a music box that played a sweet, tinkling melody, because she had mentioned once that she had loved music as a child. He bought wooden horses for the twins, carved and painted by a craftsman with real horsehair manes. And he bought a locket, silver and delicate, with space inside for 2 photographs. When he returned home 3 days later, he found Delilah in labor, 2 weeks earlier than expected. Dr. Morrison was there, and Mrs. Morrison, and the house was full of activity. Garrett's heart leaped into his throat with remembered fear, memories of that night in the snow. But Dr. Morrison assured him all was well, the baby was just eager to be born. This birth was nothing like the twins' desperate arrival in the wilderness. Delilah labored in a warm, clean bedroom, with a doctor in attendance and her husband holding her hand. She was strong and confident, knowing her body now, knowing what to expect. And when the baby came just after midnight on December 10th, it was fast and relatively easy. A daughter, Dr. Morrison announced, holding up the squalling infant. "You have a daughter, Mrs. Lawrence." A daughter. Garrett had not realized how much he wanted a daughter until that moment. He cut the cord with shaking hands, then watched as Mrs. Morrison cleaned and wrapped the baby. She was bigger than the twins had been, pink and healthy, and furious at being evicted from her warm nest. Delilah was crying and laughing at the same time, reaching for the baby. "She's perfect," Delilah breathed, cradling the infant to her chest. "Oh, Garrett, look at her. She has your eyes." It was true. The baby's eyes, when she opened them to stare seriously at her parents, were the same blue-gray as Garrett's own. He felt something profound shift in his chest, a love so fierce and immediate it took his breath away. This was his daughter, his blood, his family. "What should we name her?" he asked. Delilah smiled, tired but radiant. "I thought perhaps Grace, for the grace that brought us together, that saved us in the storm, that has given us this beautiful life." "Grace Lawrence," Garrett said, testing the name. "It's perfect. She's perfect." The twins, now walking and into everything, were fascinated by their baby sister. They wanted to touch her constantly, to bring her their toys, to pat her head with sticky hands. Thomas, the quieter of the two, would sit by her cradle for long periods, just watching her with serious dark eyes. William, more rambunctious, had to be reminded constantly to be gentle. Garrett watched them all with amazement. His family, his beautiful, chaotic, perfect family. Life settled into a new rhythm. The ranch prospered, word spreading that Garrett Lawrence had a gift with horses, could gentle even the wildest Mustang, Men came from as far away as Texas to buy from him, and he began to make a real profit. He hired 2 hands to help with the work, which meant he could spend more time with his family, something that mattered more to him than any amount of money. Delilah bloomed in her role as wife and mother. The pale, frightened woman he had found in the snow was gone, replaced by someone confident and strong, quick to laugh and slow to worry. She made friends in town, became part of the community, organized a church social, and taught Sunday school. She sang while she worked, and the sound of her voice filled the house with joy. The years passed in a blur of birthdays and Christmases, first words and first steps, skinned knees, and childhood illnesses. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and could add figures in his head faster than most adults. William was all energy and mischief, always climbing trees or riding horses too fast, giving his parents gray hairs. Grace was a perfect blend of both her parents, with Garrett's stubbornness and Delilah's gentle heart, and she had both her brothers wrapped around her tiny finger. When the twins were 5 and Grace was 3, Delilah told Garrett she was pregnant again. This time there was no fear, only joy and anticipation. Their second son, born in August of 1890, was named Matthew, and he came into the world with a lusty cry and a full head of red hair that mystified everyone until Delilah's mother came to visit and revealed that Delilah's grandmother had been Irish with hair like flame. With 4 children under the age of 7, life was chaotic and exhausting and wonderful. The ranch house that had seemed spacious enough now felt cramped. So Garrett spent a winter building an addition, 3 new bedrooms, and a proper parlor. He did most of the work himself, with help from neighbors, and when it was finished, Delilah cried with happiness. "When I was running away to California," she said, standing in the new parlor with baby Matthew on her hip, "I dreamed of having a little shop, a place of my own. But this is so much better than anything I imagined. This is a real home filled with love and laughter. You gave me this, Garrett. You gave me everything." "You gave me everything," he corrected, pulling her close, careful not to squish the baby between them. "I was just a lonely cowboy with an empty house before you came into my life. Now look at us. 4 children, a thriving ranch, more happiness than I ever thought possible, all because I heard you crying out in a snowstorm and decided to investigate." "Fate," Delilah said firmly. "It was fate. We were meant to find each other." "Then I'm grateful to fate," Garrett said, and kissed her softly. The children grew, as children do. Thomas showed an early aptitude for business and numbers, and Garrett began teaching him about the ranch's finances, how to negotiate sales, how to judge horseflesh. William lived in the saddle, could ride anything with 4 legs, and at 10 he could rope a calf as well as any adult. Grace was the peacemaker, the one who settled disputes between her brothers, who brought her parents flowers and drew pictures that Delilah treasured. Matthew was still too young to show his talents, but he worshipped his older siblings and toddled after them constantly. In the summer of 1893, when the twins were 9 years old, a letter arrived from Santa Fe. It was from a lawyer, informing Delilah that her husband's parents, the Parkers, had both died within months of each other. Their estate, such as it was, had been left entirely to their grandsons, Thomas and William Parker. Delilah stared at the letter for a long time, her face unreadable. Finally, she looked up at Garrett. "They never even tried to find us," she said quietly. 9 years, and they never once reached out to see their grandsons, and now they're gone and they've left the boys money, as if that makes up for everything. "What do you want to do?" Garrett asked. "I want to refuse it," Delilah said immediately. "I want to send it back and tell them exactly what I think of their blood money. But that would not be fair to Thomas and William. It's their inheritance, their choice to make." In the end, they put the money in trust for the twins to be used for their education or to start them in business when they came of age. It was a substantial sum, enough to send both boys to university if they wished, or to buy land of their own. Garrett made sure the twins understood that the money came with no strings attached, no expectations. They could use it or not use it as they saw fit. Thomas, practical even at 9, immediately began planning how he would invest his share. William said he wanted to use his to buy the finest horse in the territory and enter it in races. Grace said she thought they should give it all to the orphanage in Santa Fe, which made Delilah laugh and cry at the same time. Life continued its steady, satisfying rhythm. The ranch grew year by year until Garrett was running nearly 1,000 head of cattle and breeding horses that sold for premium prices. He hired more hands, built a proper bunkhouse, expanded the barns. He became a respected member of the community, serving on the church board and the school committee. Delilah, not content to simply be a rancher's wife, opened a small school in town for young children, teaching them to read and write and cipher. She charged families what they could afford, and for those who could not afford anything, she taught for free. The school became her passion, and she was beloved by parents and children alike. The twins grew into fine young men. Thomas went to university in the East, studying business and law, and came back with big ideas about modernizing the ranch. William stayed home, learning everything Garrett could teach him about running a spread, and by the time he was 20, he was as good a cattleman as any in New Mexico. Grace grew into a beauty, with her mother's dark hair and her father's blue eyes, and she had suitors lining up despite her young age. Matthew, the baby, showed signs of being an artist, always drawing and painting, seeing the world in colors and shapes. In 1899, when the twins were 15 and Grace was 13, disaster struck. A fire started in the barn. No one ever figured out how, and it spread with terrifying speed. Garrett and his men fought it desperately, but the barn was lost, along with half the herd and 3 horses. The financial blow was staggering. Years of work gone up in smoke. That night, sitting in the ashes, Garrett put his head in his hands and wondered if he could recover from this. They would have to rebuild from almost nothing, and he was not a young man anymore. He was 45, with responsibilities and a family depending on him. Maybe it was time to give up, to sell what was left and move to town, find easier work. Delilah sat down beside him, her dress smudged with soot, her face streaked with tears, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "We have survived worse than this," she said. "I gave birth in a snowstorm. You delivered twins with nothing but firelight and determination. We have faced down drought and disease and loneliness. We can face this too." "I'm tired, Delilah," he admitted. "I don't know if I have it in me to start over." "You don't have to start over alone," she said. "You have me. You have our children. You have the ranch hands who worship the ground you walk on and half the town who would help us in a heartbeat. You are not alone, Garrett Lawrence, and you never will be again." He looked at her, this woman who had come into his life broken and desperate and had become his strength, his anchor, his everything. "How did I get so lucky?" he asked. "Fate," she said with a small smile. "Remember?" They rebuilt. It took 2 years of backbreaking work and careful economy, but they rebuilt. The twins both contributed from their inheritance, refusing to take no for an answer. Thomas graduated from university and came home to help manage the ranch, bringing modern techniques and business practices that increased their efficiency. William worked harder than any 2 men, up before dawn, and not stopping until full dark, driving himself and the cattle with equal determination. Grace, at 16, surprised them all by announcing she wanted to be a teacher like her mother. She had a gift for it, patient and kind but firm, and the children in Delilah's school adored her. Matthew sold several of his paintings to wealthy buyers in Santa Fe and contributed every penny to the ranch's recovery. By 1902, the Lawrence Ranch was stronger than ever, and Garrett finally felt he could breathe easy. He was 48 years old, his dark hair now liberally streaked with silver, and his body bore the scars of a lifetime of hard work. But he was happy, happier than he had ever dreamed possible. One evening in late autumn, with the mountains turning gold and red, the whole family gathered for dinner. It was Grace's 18th birthday, and Delilah had made all her favorites. Thomas was home from Santa Fe, where he had opened a law practice but still handled all the ranch's legal affairs. William had brought his new wife, a sweet girl from Pignon named Sarah, who fit into the family like she had always been there. Matthew, now 14, had painted a portrait of Grace as his gift to her. They sat around the big table Garrett had built years ago, designed to seat a large family and never quite full enough. They ate and talked and laughed, telling old stories and making new memories. Garrett looked around the table at the faces of the people he loved most in the world and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. After dinner, after the dishes were washed and the children had scattered to their various activities, Garrett and Delilah walked outside together. It was their habit, these evening walks, a time to be alone together and talk about their day. They walked hand in hand toward the place where the old barn had stood, now replaced by a new structure twice as big. "Do you remember the night we met?" Delilah asked suddenly. "Every second of it," Garrett said. "I hear your scream in my dreams sometimes, the most terrifying and wonderful sound of my life, because it brought you to me." 18 years, Delilah mused. 18 years since you delivered Thomas and William in that snowstorm. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago. "It was a lifetime ago," Garrett said. "We were different people then. Younger, more scared, more uncertain. Now look at us. Old married couple with grown children and a ranch that runs like clockwork." "Old?" Delilah turned to face him, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Garrett Lawrence, I am only 40 years old. That is hardly ancient." "You're right," he said, pulling her close. "You're not old. You're perfect. You're exactly as perfect as you were the day I found you in the snow, and you'll be just as perfect when we're both gray and bent and sitting on the porch watching our grandchildren play." "Grandchildren." Delilah sighed. "William and Sarah will probably give us those soon enough. And Thomas has been courting that lawyer's daughter in Santa Fe. Grace will marry eventually, though I hope not too soon. I'm not ready to lose my only daughter yet." "You'll never lose her," Garrett assured her. "None of them will ever really leave us. This will always be home for them, no matter where life takes them." They stood together in the gathering darkness, watching the stars come out one by one above the mountains. Somewhere in the house, Matthew was playing the piano, a tune he had composed himself. The sound drifted out through the open windows, sweet and melancholy. "I love you," Delilah said softly. "I know I say it every day, but I don't think I say it enough. I love you, Garrett. You saved my life. You saved my sons' lives. You gave me a home and a family and a reason to wake up every morning with joy in my heart. I love you more than words can ever express." Garrett kissed her, slow and deep, with all the passion of their youth and all the tenderness of their years together. "I love you too," he said when they finally parted. "You're my heart, Delilah. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, and I thank God every single day that I was riding through that meadow and heard you cry out. Every single day." They walked back to the house together, arms around each other, two people who had found each other in the worst of circumstances and built a life beyond their wildest dreams. Behind them, the ranch stretched out in the darkness, solid and prosperous. Ahead of them, the house glowed with warm light, full of the children they had raised and the love they had built together. And somewhere in the night, the wind blew cold across the mountains, carrying snow that would soon blanket the ground in white. But inside the Lawrence ranch house, all was warmth and light and love, exactly as it had been for 18 years. Exactly as it would be for all the years to come. The following spring brought new beginnings. William and Sarah announced they were expecting their first child, and the whole family celebrated. Thomas became engaged to Catherine, the lawyer's daughter from Santa Fe, and they planned a June wedding. Grace began teaching full-time at her mother's school, which had grown so much they were planning to build a new, larger building. Matthew received a scholarship to study art in Denver, a bittersweet moment as he would be the first of their children to leave home for an extended period. But even as the children grew up and began their own lives, the center held. Every Sunday the family gathered for dinner at the ranch house, everyone coming home no matter what else was happening in their lives. It became a tradition, sacred and unbreakable, the one constant in their changing world. William and Sarah's son was born in October of 1903, a healthy boy they named Garrett Thomas, after both his grandfathers. Garrett held his first grandchild with tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed by the continuation of the family line, by the knowledge that his legacy would live on through this tiny, perfect infant. Thomas and Catherine married in a grand ceremony in Santa Fe, and the whole town of Pinon made the journey to attend. Catherine was a smart, capable woman who reminded Garrett of Delilah, and he was grateful his son had found such a good match. They settled in Santa Fe, where Thomas's law practice continued to grow, but they visited the ranch frequently, and Thomas still handled all the family's legal and business affairs. Grace, at 20, announced her engagement to David Wilson, a young doctor who had come to Pinon the previous year to take over the practice from the aging Dr. Morrison. David was a good man, serious and dedicated, and he clearly worshipped Grace. The wedding was set for the following spring. Matthew thrived in Denver, his talent recognized and nurtured by accomplished artists. His paintings began to sell for significant sums, and he sent money home religiously, though Garrett and Delilah never spent a penny of it, saving it instead for Matthew's future. He came home for holidays and summers, filling the house with his energy and enthusiasm, his stories of the wider world beyond New Mexico. On Christmas Eve of 1904, the entire family gathered at the ranch house. It had become the hub of the extended family now, with Thomas and Catherine down from Santa Fe, William and Sarah and little Garrett from their house on the eastern section of the ranch, Grace and David, and Matthew home from Denver. The house rang with laughter and conversation, the sound of children playing, the warmth of family together. After the children were put to bed and the younger adults had gone home to their own houses, Garrett and Delilah sat alone by the fire, just as they had done for 20 years. Delilah's head rested on Garrett's shoulder, and they watched the flames dance in comfortable silence. "Do you ever think about that night?" Delilah asked quietly. "The night in the snow?" "All the time," Garrett admitted. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had ridden a different path, if I had not heard you, if I had decided to keep going instead of investigating. Our whole lives hung on such a thin thread of chance." "Not chance," Delilah said firmly. "Fate. It was always meant to be this way. We were always meant to find each other, to build this life, to create this family. I believe that with my whole heart." Garrett tightened his arm around her. "Then I believe it too." The fire crackled and popped, sending up sparks that died before they reached the ceiling. Outside, snow was falling again, just as it had been falling that night so long ago, but now there was no fear, no desperation, only the peaceful silence of a winter night in the mountains. "I'm happy," Delilah said suddenly. "I just wanted to say that. I'm happy, Garrett. Happier than I ever imagined I could be. Thank you for that. Thank you for everything." "Thank you," he replied, "for trusting me that night, for staying when you could have left, for building this life with me, for loving me. Thank you, Delilah." They sat together until the fire burned down to embers, two people who had found each other in the worst of circumstances and created something beautiful. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white, covering the past and promising the future. And inside the Lawrence Ranch house, all was peace and warmth and love, just as it had been, just as it would always be. Years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and sorrows, its own challenges and triumphs. Thomas and Catherine had 3 children, all girls, who were clever and sharp-tongued like their father and kind like their mother. William and Sarah had 2 more sons, giving little Garrett 2 brothers to roughhouse with. Grace and David had twin daughters, a coincidence that made everyone laugh and remember the miraculous birth that had started it all. Matthew eventually married a painter he met in Denver, a vibrant woman named Julia, who brought color and chaos into his ordered life. They split their time between Denver and the ranch, and Julia painted the mountains and mesas with such love and skill that her work began to appear in galleries across the country. The ranch continued to prosper under the combined leadership of Garrett and his sons. They modernized carefully, bringing in new breeding stock and better techniques, but always keeping the core values that had made the Lawrence Ranch successful: hard work, fair dealing, and respect for the land and animals. Garrett and Delilah grew older together, their hair turning silver, their movements slowing, but their love never dimming. They still took evening walks together, still sat by the fire and talked, still held hands like newlyweds. They became the patriarch and matriarch of a sprawling family, beloved by children and grandchildren alike. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered to celebrate. There were nearly 30 people in attendance now, counting all the children and grandchildren and in-laws. They filled the ranch house to bursting, spilling out onto the porch and yard. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, stories told and retold until they became part of the family mythology. Thomas stood up to give a toast, his voice carrying across the assembled family. 25 years ago, he said, our mother was dying in a snowstorm, and this man, this stranger, saved her life. He saved my life and William's life. He could have ridden past. He could have taken us to town and left us there. Instead, he opened his home and his heart. He became our father in every way that matters. He showed us what it means to be a good man, a good husband, a good father. Everything good in my life, I owe to him. To Garrett Lawrence, the man who saved us all. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Garrett, embarrassed and deeply moved, tried to wave it off, but Delilah stood up beside him and raised her glass. To my husband, she said, her voice thick with emotion, the bravest, kindest, most wonderful man I have ever known. 25 years ago, you delivered my babies by firelight in the wilderness. You have been delivering miracles ever since. I love you, Garrett Lawrence. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. They kissed, to the delight and catcalls of their family, and Garrett thought his heart might burst from the happiness of it all. This life, this family, this love, it was more than he had ever dreamed possible. He was a rich man, not in money, but in the things that truly mattered. As the party wound down and people began to drift toward home, Garrett and Delilah found themselves alone on the porch, watching the stars come out. It was a warm June night, nothing like the bitter cold of that December when they had met. But Garrett was reminded of it anyway. Every year, every day, he was reminded of how lucky he was. 25 years, he mused, a quarter of a century, and it still feels like it has been no time at all. We have a lot more years ahead of us, Delilah said firmly. I plan to be a very old woman, Garrett, surrounded by great-grandchildren and causing trouble until my last day. He laughed and pulled her close. Then I plan to be a very old man right beside you because I'm not going anywhere without you. They stood together in the starlight, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something enduring. Behind them, the ranch house glowed with warm light, full of family and love. Around them, the land stretched out in peaceful darkness, productive and prosperous. Above them, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance, the same stars that had looked down on them that night in the snow 25 years ago. And in that moment, standing on the porch of the home they had built together, with the sounds of their family drifting through the open windows, Garrett Lawrence knew he was the luckiest man alive. He had saved Delilah's life once, in a snowstorm in the wilderness. But the truth was, she had saved his too. She had given him purpose and meaning, love and family, a reason to wake up every morning with gratitude in his heart. I would do it all again, he said suddenly. Every hardship, every struggle, every moment of fear and uncertainty, I would do it all again in a heartbeat if it meant ending up right here, right now with you. Delilah looked up at him, her eyes shining with tears and starlight. So would I, she whispered. So would I, my love. They went inside together, into the warmth and light of their home, into the life they had built from nothing but determination and love. The door closed behind them, and the night settled over the Lawrence Ranch, peaceful and content. In the years that followed, they would face more challenges, as all families do. There would be illnesses and arguments, financial setbacks, and personal disappointments. But through it all, the foundation they had built that night in the snow held firm. Their love never wavered, their commitment never faltered, and their family never forgot the story of how it all began. With a woman's cry in a snowstorm, a cowboy's courage, and two tiny babies born by firelight in the wilderness. And when Garrett and Delilah finally passed many years later, within months of each other as old couples sometimes do, they left behind a legacy of love and strength that would echo through generations. Their descendants would tell the story of the snowstorm and the twins, of the ranch house that became a home, of the love that conquered impossible odds. It would become legend in their family, passed down from parent to child, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, miracles can happen. The Lawrence Ranch continues to this day, still in the family, still prosperous, still home to people who value hard work and fair dealing and love above all else. And on winter nights when the snow falls thick and fast over northern New Mexico, they remember the story of how it all began, and they are grateful for the courage of a cowboy who did not ride past, and the strength of a woman who refused to give up, and the twin boys who fought to survive their first night in the world. It is a love story, yes, but more than that. It is a story of survival and courage, of family and legacy, of two people who found each other in the worst of circumstances and created something beautiful. It is the story of Garrett and Delilah Lawrence, and it will never be forgotten.